2017 is when Mr. Chapa came to Arlington ASID. He's even started a program for the seniors in Arlington at Sam Houston. They've raised about $50,000 in scholarship money. So I'm gonna tell you, this guy has got his fingers on the pulse in regards to the schools and what's happening in our marketplace. So, further ado, Mr. Justin Chapa.
All right, well, thank you all for having me today. I'm gonna try to get this. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
All right, so even more? What about now? All right, it's pretty close to my face. Jeff told me there were some opinionated people here, and then I saw Wayne, and I didn't, I figured it couldn't get much, right, couldn't get much more than that. I know a few of you from serving on different committees over the year. Mr. Columbus, I see in the back there, and Cleet McAllister. Once upon a time, we were on the comprehensive planning committee for the city. And I see City Councilmember Gonzalez back there, who, in addition to formerly being on the Mansfield ISD board, is my back fence neighbor. So once upon a time, when I moved into the neighborhood, I almost didn't buy my house because I was worried it wasn't in Arlington ISD, and found out that our fence was the dividing line. So good to see you, Raul. I grew up here in Arlington, over on the east side by the General Motors factory. Went to Sam Houston High School, which is where my parents went, which is where my wife went, who she might come in here in a little bit, but we're heading down to a training in San Antonio afterwards, and so we're gonna hit the road as soon as this is over. But I did get started on Arlington ISD committees. On committees in 2011, I got on the board in 2017, worked on the Financial Futures Committee, Bond Oversight Committee, Capital Needs Committee, helped run all the bond campaigns and whatnot for several years. My background, after I graduated from SAM, went off to college, became a teacher. I actually taught 12th grade government and economics with a program called Teach for America, which is essentially the Peace Corps for teaching in the United States. And so was on the border for a few years teaching, and then went off to law school. But the plan was always to move back home. My family was here, my wife's family was here. I have 3 kids, they're all in Arlington ISD schools. And we got 2, well, now we'll have 2 at Arlington. We were doing the 3 kids at 3 schools thing for a minute, which was a bit running us ragged, but I'll have 2 at Arlington High, which does hurt my Sam soul quite a bit every time I see the green. But then I also have a 4th grader at Corey Elementary too. All my kids are in the dual language program and spend half their school day in Spanish, which is a pretty cool thing the district offers. So I want to leave a lot of time for Q&A on this, because education is a real hot topic in the state, really the nation right now. Heading into that Q&A, I have a slide presentation that I was going to pilot at a event that we have for the school district called Trustee Talks. We have it about 3 or 4 times a year. Our event for this was canceled due to inclement weather back in April, and so some of the slides I'm going to really fly through because I'm trying to get to the Q&A. It's a little bit different format than what this was created for, but this touches on, I think, 3 of the biggest issues facing not just Arlington ISD, but all public schools in not only Texas really, but the nation right now. And it's some information that's pretty counterintuitive, but I want to get it out there because I think if school districts approach these types of issues as local issues instead of these statewide, societal, national issues that they are, we're going to make a lot of very poor public policy choices that we'll be living with for decades to come. So, okay, I'm on the Arlington ISD Board of Trustees. These are my colleagues, and just real quick, our current president is Sarah McMurrow. I served as president for the last 2 years. It's customary in Arlington ISD to do 2 years as president, then move on, and my 2 years ran through. Previously was also vice president and chair of the governance committee, but our current president is Sarah McMurrow. Vice President's Leanne Haynes, our secretary is Brooklyn Richardson. Leanne and Brooklyn, you might recognize their names, they were just on the ballot. There's me, our newest trustee is Larry Mike. He was elected to the board in 2024. David Wilbanks, who also has a long history of committee service in Arlington ISD. We actually started on the same committee back in 2011 together, and he joined the board in 2019. And then Melody Fowler joined the board in 2018, and as many of you know, she's currently hoping to go to the city council. Okay, so 3 public school challenges that I want to touch on today: enrollment in facilities, state funding, and the accountability system. And when I'm talking about accountability, we're really talking about standardized testing and how Texas grades its public schools. Once upon a time, There was a tiered rating system that started at exemplary, and then it was recognized, and then it was met standard, and then it was unacceptable, academically unacceptable. Beginning, I forget at the moment if it was 2018 or 19, the state moved to an A through F system. It really was part of a nationwide trend where certain interest groups pushed for A through F grading, thinking it more closely aligned with how people grade things at school and in their daily lives, and that's the system we've been under since that shift. It was suspended for a few years during COVID, but it's been back since 2023. We'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, so to start with enrollment in facilities, Arlington ISD just went out for a bond. On the facility side, that bond was about $430 million, but when you adjust that for inflation, that's actually the smallest bond that we've done since 2009. We had pretty big bonds in 2014 and 2019. Some of you were part of those efforts to get those passed or to create them, but those two bonds were essentially doing a lot of heavy lifting to catch the district up on a lot of deferred maintenance or catching up with what other districts were able to offer and opportunities for the last really probably 15 years or so. So if you've watched the news or read a paper in the last couple of years, you will have seen stories, probably going to be several today, about how school districts in Texas are closing campuses. This is a statewide issue. For the districts have been closing campuses for 3 or 4 years now pretty rapidly. And what's driving that trend is not really budgetary issues, although the articles you'll see on them are about those closures are often framed in terms of the money savings from closing a campus. The reality is that school districts don't save a whole lot of money simply closing a campus. And so over 60% of school districts in Texas now are experiencing declining enrollment. 84% of them are experiencing a significant budget deficit. Those two things go hand in hand. In Texas, school funding is tied to enrollment. It's actually tied to average daily attendance for each student. So as districts have fewer and fewer students, the amount of revenue they receive from the state, and districts are almost exclusively dependent on the state for their revenue, that amount goes down as the fewer students that the district has. The problem, if any of you run a business, is that doesn't mean that your fixed costs go down. And so yes, you will save some money from closing a campus. For example, you're not going to pay for utilities for that building, but you still have an obligation to serve students with particular opportunities in classes, extracurriculars. You need staff to do those. And so even though you might have a building that has half as many kids as it could hold, you still have to staff that building in many ways as if the building were full. So that creates a lot of strain on districts where you might have schools that were built 40, 50 years ago in close proximity to each other, where today those campuses are maybe half full. And so you see a lot of districts as their enrollment has gone down, looking for ways to consolidate those campuses to create efficiencies, not only on the cost saving side, which is a little bit, but mainly on the opportunity side. It is simply harder to run a school district with lots of under-enrolled buildings than it is to provide the same opportunities to kids in one facility. So I talked a bit earlier, I'm going to give you some counterintuitive information. So for decades, Texas has been one of the fastest growing states in the country. It's the Texas miracle, and that messaging is sort of ingrained in us. We know our population is booming, has been for a long time, and our public school systems have been growing as well, almost in tandem with that growth. And if I were to put up a chart of public school enrollment growth in Texas and Texas population growth, they would look like they have a very close association until 2 years ago. What happened 2 years ago is for the first time, and I know this is small and you can't really see it, for the first time, public school enrollment decoupled or diverged from population growth. So we're seeing in Texas, and this is actually playing out in states all across the country, public school enrollment is not tracking population growth anymore. And so, and the projections are for this year that there will be another decline in public school enrollment, even though Texas's population will continue to go up. And that's what this chart shows. There has been a lot of discussion in districts, including Arlington ISD, about enrollment declines. And the narrative typically frames this discussion in terms of people are fleeing public schools. Something must be wrong with public schools. and then you use that narrative to drive what other narrative you want to drive. And I'm just trying to be objective here, and we can do Q&A later. And I don't mean to be too flippant about these concerns, but this is what we hear frequently. It's public schools are not serving students well, public schools are indoctrinating kids, things along those lines. You can insert the enrollment decline with those narratives, and it seems like they fit. There must be a reason that people are leaving the public schools. The problem is this is happening everywhere. And it doesn't matter really the demographics of the district, although you see this much more substantially in older urban and suburban districts like Arlington, like Fort Worth, but you also see it in recently fast growth and perceived to be high performing districts such as Frisco, South Lake, Keller, Grapevine, Colleyville. I wish I had had time to pull this, but I saw a nice graphic yesterday that an interest group put out that has been tracking school closures in Texas over the last year. And you will see on that graphic, it's all across the state. South Lake's closing a junior high. Frisco, which was a fast growth district until very recently, has closed multiple campuses over the last year. If you followed the politics up in Grapevine, Colleyville, there was a significant issue in their school board races this year over the planned closure of 2 elementary schools. And these are A-rated districts. And so it's not as simple as saying, well, the school districts must not be performing well and people are looking for other opportunities, because this is literally happening regardless of the school district's grade. In Arlington, we have had 2 very significant demographic studies done in the last 2 years, and they both agree to look into this issue, and they both agree on the same thing, which is the enrollment decline in Arlington ISD and in most school districts in Texas is actually due to a substantial decline in birth rates since the Great Recession, tracking back to about 2007. And I'd encourage you to, the New York Times has done a couple of great articles on this in detail, pulling census data. Birth rates are down about 25% since the Great Recession. And so our last demographic report, I just pulled this from this chart from a slide. You'll see that the enrollment growth in Arlington ISD almost directly tracks the decline in birth rates in our area. And I know it's really small to see, but if you can read that table on the right, this is just part, there was another table in the presentation before this, but collectively, the demographers looked back 15 years and asked in every year, what was the available number of students who could have come to kindergarten in AISD? So what number of kids were out there that we could have hoped to have get in our classrooms? And for 15 years, we have consistently pulled in between about 79 and 81% of the available kindergartners. We actually, this year, pulled in 82%, which is the highest we've been in a long time. The issue is that for 15 consecutive years almost, the number of available kindergartners to come to school shrunk, and shrunk more recently pretty dramatically. And so the enrollment decline is in large part, not exclusively, I want to be clear about that, but in large part explained by a decline in birth rates. And that is why you're seeing statewide public school enrollment declining even as population growth goes up, because folks are just having a lot fewer kids than they used to. In school districts like Arlington, that trend is compounded by a couple of other socioeconomic trends that are not great if you want a lot of students in your buildings. Many of you work here in Arlington, you've lived here for a long time, and you know that our neighborhoods the housing values are going up. So it is, the price of entering Arlington has gone up. It's not necessarily, we're landlocked. It's not a community where you can come in and we're building new developments all over the place, and it's cheap housing, and families with really young kids can come in and find a good starter home here. That's becoming harder and harder to do. We see families coming in here later in life with grown or almost grown kids, and they're able to afford the more relatively more expensive houses in the area. You do see growth in school districts in the DFW area along the fringes, what we call the exurbs. So think about Northwest ISD or Decatur or Denton. Those school districts are growing because they're not landlocked. They have a lot of housing developments. Housing is relatively cheaper. And so the price of entering for young families into those communities is still relatively low, like it was in Arlington maybe 15, 20 years ago. The other dynamic which is tied to that is folks are staying in their homes a lot longer. So we don't see the neighborhood regeneration that we saw during most of Arlington ISD's growth, because folks are just staying in their homes longer after their children have grown.
But those trends all together with the decline in birth rates, and it's not a great picture for turning around enrollment decline, given those socioeconomic factors. That doesn't mean folks are not coming to AISD for other reasons, and I'll touch on those in a minute. But the bottom line from this graph, enrollment decline in Arlington ISD tracks the decline in birth rates. Arlington ISD has continued to get roughly the same percentage of available students every year during that decline. There's just fewer kids available. So where do folks who don't choose Arlington ISD go? Because that's something that does happen. And I just want to highlight a few things from this small graph that we were surprised to find, because we get compared to our neighbor to the south a lot, Mansfield ISD. And what we found is we actually inbound students out of district transfers. So we accept district transfers from other districts. The district that we get the most students from is Mansfield ISD. We, this last year, pulled in over 900 students from Mansfield ISD, and we only lost, where did it go? We only lost 167 students. So our net inbound from Mansfield ISD is substantially higher than the number of students we lose to that district, even though it is a high B and in recent past A-rated district. And that was a surprise to us. Another surprise to us, going back to this chart, is we only get about 183 kids from Grand Prairie ISD, but we're losing almost 1,800 kids a year to Grand Prairie ISD, even though we statistically outperform Grand Prairie in a number of areas. So this is something that we are starting to dig deeper into now, find the root cause of that. I suspect it's going to be, just if I were shooting from the hip, we do not have a lot of, Arlington ISD's boundary on the east side goes all the way to the Dallas County line. So we have a substantial part of west city of Grand Prairie. We have several elementary schools over there, but Grand Prairie ISD has several high schools and junior highs and specialty schools right on that 161 corridor. We have the elementary schools there. We have no close junior highs, high schools, or specialty programs. The kids in those schools have to go all the way to Sam Houston or Bowie for high school, or they have to go to formerly Carter, now Rodriguez, which is much closer to 360, or they have to go to Barnett Junior High on the very southeast part of our district for junior high. And I think we're going to find out that a lot of those parents on that border, it's just a lot more convenient for them to drive right down the street to the Grand Prairie junior highs and high schools than to come to AISD. Oh, another thing on this chart is you'll see that there's charter schools. There are kids in our community who go to charter schools, families who choose charter schools and private schools instead of AISD. That information is reflected on here. What's really interesting, and I wish I had a graph that showed this better, you'll remember from what I just said about getting about 80% of the available kids every year being pretty constant. The charter school, private school growth over the last 10 years increased pretty rapidly about 10 years ago as more and more charter schools were built, especially big ones like Newman International or International Leadership of Texas. But then it has kind of stagnated. When charter schools do open up, we do see kids go to them, but it's not nearly the trend that we were seeing about 10 years ago. And charter schools that are opening up now tend to be much smaller. Charters are transitioning a little bit to a model called micro-schooling, where they may open a campus in maybe a strip mall that only serves 30 or 60 kids in a very highly specialized way. And so, again, coming back to the enrollment decline being primarily driven by birth rates and not necessarily by students fleeing Arlington ISD. There's also a big convenience factor that goes into this. And so this, real quickly touching on this is a scatter plot of students that we believe are attending private school in Arlington ISD, and you'll see it's concentrated a little bit primarily on the southwest side of town. And it just so happens that that's where the private schools are. And so we think there is some convenience factor at play here. Coincidentally, the West Arlington elementary schools are the campuses at the elementary level in our district where we don't have an underutilization problem. Those campuses are pretty full, and also doing pretty well on the A through S system. So where are the kids who are leaving AISD coming from? Surprisingly, they're actually coming from the east side of town and the northeast part of town. These are parts of the district where 10 years ago we had a substantial overcapacity problem. We had many campuses on the east side of town that had 5, 10, 12 temporary buildings, A lot of those campuses today are only 50 or 60% full. This is also this part of town and the campuses where we have the highest mobility rate. Mobility rate is how many kids come into a campus and leave a campus in 1 year. So these are families that are typically moving maybe from apartment to apartment over the course of a year or every 2 years. We have some campuses in our district where statistically the entire student body turns over every 3 years. My own, another hot sports opinion on this is if this is a really fancy graph showing where people live and where they're willing to travel for those charter schools. And I think what we will find, and we're surveying some of these families, at least the ones willing to talk to us, again, the convenience factor. A family can choose a charter school and then attend that charter school from that point forward, no matter where they live, whether it's in Arlington or Grand Prairie or Mansfield, they can move wherever, but they're tied to that charter school. Little known, I thought it was well-known fact growing up in Arlington ISD, but apparently not that well-known. You can do the same thing in Arlington ISD. We have been an internal open transfer district for decades. You can live anywhere in Arlington ISD and send your kid to any Arlington ISD school as long as space is available. And I think we need to do a better job of getting that message out. This is a graph that shows public school enrollment's gone down a little bit as charter school enrollment has trickled up. The number of charter schools increases statewide every year. Another hot sports opinion, from a taxpayer perspective, that's not a great thing because you're also paying for charter schools. So if there are districts that are losing enrollment in their public schools and having to close facilities that taxpayers paid for because kids are going to a charter school, also understand the taxpayers also paid for that charter school. And if they use bonds, which they can, that didn't have to go to a public vote like the ISDs do. Charter schools can authorize bonds by a vote of their boards without going to the public, even though they're using public money. So in essence, taxpayers are paying twice for parallel school systems. So something else we can come back on the Q&A. This is a lot of detailed data, but where you see the highlights here, I just want to point them out. This is projections going forward into the future and looking a few years back. What we do see in Arlington ISD is we do not have an underutilization problem at our high schools. That's because a lot of private schools and charter schools are set up on a K-6 or K-8 model. And we see a big influx into our district in grade 9, really starting in grade 8, of people who want their kids to take advantage of the high school opportunities that we offer in Arlington ISD that are not available in their districts or charter schools. They get them in here in 8th grade so they can apply for them and be here in 9th grade. So we do see an uptick in enrollment for those years. I could go through here and point out different things. This is a school by school utilization and enrollment chart. Bottom line is we've got a significant number of campuses, especially at the elementary level, that today are about 50 or 60% full. Overall, we have been losing enrollment primarily due to the decline in birth rates for a few years. Both of our demographers, interestingly enough, agree that the most likely trajectory for that decline is that we will continue to lose kids for about somewhere between 7 and 10 years. Birth rates will stabilize. It takes a while for them to work through the system, and they're projecting that we'll stabilize around 43,000 students. Now, the range of where we could end up, I think, is different from the different demographers, but that's what they agree on, is we'll probably land around 43,000 students. A lot less than what Arlington ISD has been in the past. Still, from a national perspective, a very, very big school district. These charts show the utilization trends that I was talking about. Basically on this, orange, yellow, and green are higher utilization, so more kids in the buildings relative to capacity. Red is underutilized. These are campuses that, for example, if you look over on the east side, we've got one campus, Hale Elementary, that's not even 50% capacity, projected to drop to about 250 kids in the very near future. Similar issue on the junior high side, but not as significant. We have 3 campuses that have some significant underutilization. And if you watched the last board meeting, you know that district administration is recommending that AISD move the 6th grade classes up to junior high for a variety of reasons, but one of those is to right-size this underutilization problem with the junior highs and create more opportunities for the 6th graders. 6th grade at an elementary level is very, very rare nationally and in Texas. The vast majority of school districts, whether they use a middle school model of grades 6, 7, 8, or some other model do not have sixth graders at the elementary level. The biggest driver of that is state curriculum and extracurricular opportunities are really designed for a 6, 7, 8 model. And so we have sixth graders at elementary schools in Arlington that are not able to access extracurriculars they could if they were in a middle school model. So just some background thing, we can talk more about that in Q&A. And then here's the high schools, and as I said, we do not really have an underutilization problem with the high schools. People are coming to AISD for the advanced academic, career tech, fine arts, athletic opportunities that we offer at the high school level. And I can go into more detail about that, but we have been nationally recognized in the fine arts for over 2 decades. We have more national merit recognition scholars than we've ever had, even with the declining enrollment. And we have really across the board programs that are nationally and state recognized. Tied in with the underutilization problem is an old building problem. So when we were going out for the bond and talking about building a new South Davis, it was like, well, how did you decide on South Davis? Well, a couple things. South Davis is old. South Davis is one of our campuses that's overutilized. It actually has 25% more kids in the building it was designed to hold. We have about 10 temporaries on the back side of that building. And the combination of those things makes it very expensive to run that building. We don't just drive around willy-nilly and decide which campuses that we're going to work on. At all times, we are continually running it's our facility condition index. We work with third-party engineers and consultants to go through our buildings and determine the educational adequacy of them and the facility condition. Each one gets a score, and we drive the dollars where the needs are. And so you'll see from this that South Davis Elementary had the highest FCI score in the entire district. That's why it was selected to be part of the proposition to build a new one. We've done this in the past. For those of you who grew up here, we took Roark offline. We took Knox Elementary offline, which was the original Ferguson Junior High that my mom and her brothers went to. Those buildings were built in the 50s. And we can do things to keep those buildings going, but over time you're sort of, putting good money, chasing bad, and the cost of maintaining those buildings continues to go up. And that was a big driver of the decision at Blanton. Despite putting $15 million in that building over the last decade, it was going to cost us about $40 million to bring it up to spec with a new campus. And so combining that with Blanton was less than half full, that is one reason Blanton was selected to consolidate this year. Okay, how am I doing on time?
Good. You're great. You're good. You got 20 minutes.
Okay, all right, I'm going to blow through the next because I want to get to the Q&A, but I do want to do a real quick explanation of how school finance works in Texas, because most people don't know this, and it drives, I think, a lot of opinions and policy making that would be better informed if they understood how school finance works. So as Wayne knows, there's an old joke in Texas that there are 2 people in the state of Texas who actually under school finance, and even they aren't sure on some days. But the bottom line is that when you get your tax bill, you have all the government entities that are listed on it, you have your tax rate, you have your assessed value, and then there's a number. For all of those government entities except school districts, that money goes directly to that governing entity. For ISDs, that money goes to the state in Austin that runs that money through a bunch of very complicated school finance formulas that are tweaked every legislative cycle, and it spits back out money to the ISDs. That system is designed, in the shorthand term, you've heard Robin Hood, it is designed to stabilize funding. So in an environment where property values might be increasing rapidly in an area, the school finance system is designed to tamp that rate of growth down. So if you are in a school district that is overall considered property poor, you get more money from the state than your local tax base generates. If you're in a higher wealth district, it's the opposite. You get less money from the state, more of your money comes from your local tax base. And if you are in a district that is subject to something called recapture, then you actually pay exclusively from your local tax base, and a chunk of money that you pay in goes to other school districts. That's the Robin Hood system. That system has hardly been tweaked in 20 years. There are a huge number of districts today that would never have been on the recapture list 20 years ago that are on the recapture list today, including our Arlington ISD. We tipped into recapture a few years ago. Our payments are pretty small, but if you look at some districts like Dallas ISD or Austin ISD, their property tax value is so high for their geography, they're paying massive amounts of money into the school finance system. Starting in 2019, the legislature also introduced a concept called mandatory compression. And so, long story short, mandatory compression requires school districts to reduce their tax rates every year. A really short version of this is that we are essentially told today what the maximum tax rate is that we can levy on the maintenance and operations side by the Texas Comptroller. And if I go back real quick to this slide, because I forgot to mention this important thing, within your tax rate for school districts, there's two buckets. There's basically the operations budget, and then there's the bond budget, which has the fancy name of INS, or interest and sinking rate. The bond bucket cannot be used to pay for things that should come out of the operational budget side. So our operations budget today in Arlington ISD, about 88% of that budget goes for staff compensation. Another 5% goes roughly towards utilities. We have mandatory contributions to the teacher retirement system. So when you're talking about, well, what are we going to do? What else can we cut? There's very little beyond staff compensation that's available, because that's such a big part of the operations budget. We cannot use bond funds to offset those operational costs, including staff pay. So there's two different tax rates. On the M&O side, we are capped. In 2020, we went out for an election. You might remember the signs. They were teal and red. They had an apple on them that said "Pay Our Teachers." That was called a voter approval tax ratification election. That is when Arlington ISD went out, maxed out its M&O rate on the promise of paying its teachers more. It passed in the November 2020 election, and that's exactly what we've done. Since 2021, Arlington ISD has been the overall highest paying district for teachers in DFW. So we were the only district in the state to do that. We did 5 consecutive years of 4% raises, and that put us at the top. I can talk in Q&A about how that's been a huge dividend to attracting high quality teachers to this district. We've really started to see that, especially in the last 18 months. Historically, though, I just want you to have a perspective, because we hear a lot of criticism about the tax rates that get levied in the ISD. The tax rates that are assessed today are substantially lower than they were 10 and 20 years ago, in part because of reductions that the board unilaterally has done, also in part because of the compression system. It is harder to not tax at the rate set by the comptroller, because anytime a district taxes below that rate, because you might hear some folks say, well, why aren't you taxing at the lowest possible rate? Remember that state funding and local funding mix, the further you drop below, a school district drops below the tax rate set by the comptroller, it's giving up not only local revenue, but state revenue. And so it starts a decline in funding spiral. In an environment where 84% of districts are running a deficit and already looking at layoffs and things like that, it's very hard to justify going below and cutting programs going below that tax rate set by the comptroller. On the accountability side, you've also heard the last 2 or 3 years, Arlington ISD is a C-rated district. Makes my blood boil, because it is remember, there's statistics, there's lies, damned lies and statistics. That's a little bit of what's going on in our accountability system. I mentioned earlier the transition from the pre-A through F system to the A through F system. That was a big transition for school districts statewide. Heading into that transition, almost half of all campuses in Arlington ISD had at least one academic distinction under the old system. Several of them had more than 3. We moved to A through F. In 2019, we had a B. We were doing very well. COVID hit. No scores in 2020 or 2021. Scoring came back in 2022, and that's what you're seeing here on the left bar graph here. If you can't see it very well, here's what it shows. It shows that almost 70% of the campuses in AISD had an A or a B in 2022. 15% had a C. C on the state rating scale is considered average. Only 5% of our campuses had under a C in 2022. What happened? During the 2022-2023 school year, the Texas Education Agency, incidentally at the same time the legislature first made a major push for a voucher system, decided mid-year to create a new way that it graded accountability, the STAR testing and accountability for the high schools, and apply it retroactively beginning that year. Normally, when TEA does a major change like that, like it did with going to the A through F system, it gives districts a year or two to adjust to the new standards. That did not happen in 2023. You might remember there were some lawsuits over that, and those grades got held up for multiple years. Both 23 and 24 were held up. When those grades were released last year in 2025, what they showed, and if any of you have done any work in statistics at all, you know that you should not see in a standardized system, especially a big standardized system, you should not see large changes in performance year to year, especially if there's a history of performing adequately. In 1 year, Arlington ISD went from 5% of our campuses being under a C, just 5%, to 50%. That corresponded statewide in 1 year, 20% of the campuses got below a C in the entire state. Most of them hitting an F for the first time ever. We had multiple campuses in Arlington ISD go from a B to an F in 1 year. And so you should not see changes that large in a big system that is statistically valid from year to year, but that is what we saw. That's a system that we have to deal with, and so we will roll with it. Understand at the elementary and junior high level, that grade is determined by one thing, and it's the score on the STAR test. So if you don't like the STAR test, you should understand right now that elementary and junior highs all across the state, the sole basis for their A through F grade is the STAR test. Coincidentally, when you look at high schools tend to have much higher grades or statistically more higher grades than our junior highs and elementary schools in Arlington ISD, and that's because at the high school level, the state takes into account a whole bunch of other factors, including how well we were preparing kids for college and their careers and graduation rates. The remainder of these charts show how we're making progress towards getting rid of those D or F campuses. The new scores should be out any day. The big benchmark test that we did back in March shows that we are projected to eliminate all of our F campuses except one by the end of this year. Hopefully that trend holds. In 2022, by the way, we had 0 F campuses. And the next year we went to 14. I also want to highlight how the state accountability system can make small changes in performance between school districts look really big. So for the nerds of you out there like me who follow school education policy discussions in Texas, Dallas ISD has been held out for many years as sort of the poster child for how districts should be handling education in Texas. Dallas ISD is doing a lot of innovative things. I'm going to go hang out with Dan Mitchke from the Dallas ISD board later. We're both officers on the Texas Association School Board. They're doing a lot of really good things. They are not doing way better than Arlington ISD. And so I just threw up here some data from last year comparing Dallas ISD's accountability ratings to Arlington ISD's. And what I want you to notice as you run through here, Dallas is sort of the poster child for what we should be doing. They're at a B, we're at a C. We got an outside shot of getting a B this year. We're not that far apart in our overall score. We have a significantly higher graduation rate than Dallas ISD, but in our overall performance, we're only 5 points off in one category, 6 in another, 4 in another, and yet we're viewed very differently, I think, in the North Texas community. That's also interesting when you look at, and this is something I want to really highlight. When folks are having discussions about education today, in my opinion, the low-hanging fruit is to whack school districts for the number of kids who can read proficiently. And there seems to be a moral panic at the moment about using some of this data to say, our kids can't read. And the response I want to have is, when did you become concerned about this? Because that has been true essentially since we started measuring reading proficiency in the United States. So there's two things going on at the same time. There's the state level accountability system, which is the STAR test. There's also in the background, there's the National Assessment of Educational Performance, or the NAEP test, that has been running in the background at the national level since the early 1980s. NAEP scores in reading proficiency, they measure 4th grade. Here we hear a lot about 3rd grade, but they're pretty much the same. According to the NAEP test, only 30% of kids across the entire country can read proficiently. Only 59% are at a basic proficiency level. Texas is above that average in both of them. It's not a new thing. If you go back to, at least this is the only date I could find going back to 1992, but I know it didn't really change much before that. You go back to 1992, NAEP scores in 1992 on their scale score was a 215. Last year, Texas was at a 214. The national average 1992 213, national average 2024 212. This test, unlike the state level test, stays relatively constant. The states get to set their own test and create their own test. And if you look across the country, states have a habit of creating a new testing system. Scores in public schools drop pretty dramatically. Over the next 4 to 6 years, they come up. The state decides it's going to reset the state standardized testing, and all of a sudden the public schools look bad again. And it's a trend that plays out not just in Texas, but everywhere. If you're looking at reading from another angle, it's the same trend. NAEP scores have fluctuated a little bit over time, but if you're looking at the long perspective, our kids today are reading, according to the NAEP, not too far off of how they've done historically. Now, that's not to discount that it looked like there was an improvement in reading about 10 or 15 years ago that we've come down from. Lots of things might be causing that. We can talk about them, including something called the science of reading that was perhaps something we shouldn't have dove into, but was standard educational practice. But my point here is that if we're going to have a societal freak-out moment about reading proficiency, we have to take into account the fact that we are actually where we have been historically. And so any policy decisions we make around this area, any criticism we might want to level of the public schools that are driving this, there was no mythical era where a majority of our kids were reading proficiently under national standards. And so that's all I got. That was a lot, and I want to take your questions, but I understand a lot of this is counterintuitive to the narratives that are out there, but it is something that I want to start talking more about, because I do believe very strongly, both at a state and local level, we're going to make very poor policy choices if these policy decisions are not made in the context of the socioeconomic trends and the educational trends that have been going on for a long time.
Thank you, Justin. Just real quickly, when we were in the other room, we had several people complain that they couldn't hear the questions. We do have a microphone. I asked for a cordless one, but that wasn't forthcoming for whatever reason. But maybe in this room we don't need mics, so maybe we can try it and see. And it's just going to be a little awkward to move this around with the cord. But if people will ask their questions as loudly as they can, we may not need to mess with the microphone. I'm sorry, what?
Justin, if you could repeat the question too.
Okay, just repeat the question. Justin, what are we doing with schools that are like, are we selling schools? Are we selling land? What are we doing with them?
Yeah, so I'll take your question in two parts. First, I'll talk about the land. It's come up lately, I feel like I think there's some confusion between what the city can do with its land and what we can do with land. We've been criticized more recently for land banking, which is something we are actually, as school districts, we cannot do. We cannot go out and buy property and hold it and wait for development. We have aggressively been selling off the district's property holdings for about 6 years now. If you were to pull a list of the district's property, you might get a bunch of addresses, but a lot of those addresses are very tiny, undevelopable for us. Parcels we can't use because of their size that we got from sort of the property tax strike-off. We have to have a valid educational reason for holding those properties. I could tell you which ones they are. There's not that many at this point that we could actually use, but we do have something in mind for them. Bottom line is we just don't have a lot of land. We have a lot of land that we have schools on that we're using for sure, but not unused land. On the unused school where we have a building, so maybe in the Blanton situation, or in the future if we have to close or consolidate a facility, new state law, if we keep the building open, we in any way keep it up, we have to give a right of first refusal to charter schools. So charter school, we have to offer the ability for them to come in and buy that property from us. I say this is a little bit like if you're a McDonald's franchisee and you want to move somewhere else, there being a condition that before you can move across the street or down the street, you have to offer your building to Wendy's. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to offer it to your competitor, but that's the environment we're in.
I was just going to ask, one of the things with people I've been with several times is the importance of the need of counselors. The counselors will make the difference. Even though we're paying the teachers good to get good teachers in, counselors in the individual basis will make or break the new students and what attention you give them. So just instead of testing and the things that they're required to do, have them have more importance in their individual associations with students, which will make a big difference.
Sure, counselors are absolutely important, and they do so many jobs from the high school level. They're not just working with kids, to help them academically. They're helping get their schedule set and facilitating testing and a number of things. There is a lot of data that shows, especially at the elementary level, if students have access to a counselor that can do more than that can address maybe mental health needs that they have, especially if they're coming from a family background where they've got some trauma that they've got that they're going through that's playing out at the school level, that absolutely matters. But the data, the research is overwhelming that the most significant lever for improvement in academic performance, especially among students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, is high quality teachers. In our district right now, 78% of our kids qualify as socioeconomically disadvantaged. We're pretty dissimilar from the city as a whole, but our average student is coming from a very underprivileged background. So they've got to have those good teachers.
I need to preface this by saying I am not a contractor, nor do I expect to be. My wife and I recently moved here from New Jersey, where we spent 25 years at Rutgers University.
Okay.
Can you tell me, when it comes time to build a new school, how does Arlington award a contract? Do you know at bid time, have you pre-qualified contractors? Do you have to do that? Or if you could just spend a few minutes explaining the process.
Sure. So I'm not super involved in the procurement side as a board member, but essentially at this point now we've done four really substantial bonds since 2009. We have a lot of experience working with certain vendors and contractors, and so I do believe our facility side has a qualification list. It's pretty broad, and we use different procurement methods depending on the size of the project. And you can find, I can tell you that there's a procurement vendor portion of the district website. You can find more information on that. But for the big projects, that's much more thoroughly vetted and probably folks that we've worked with over the last 15 years or so on big facility projects.
Okay, let's talk about teaching the kids in our schools things that can help them succeed in life, especially, as you say, on disadvantaged kids,
Yes.
the ones that are not going to go on to college. We know even college graduates are going to have a hard time finding a job. AI is coming along. McDonald's is using robots to place orders. As far as I know, we have one school on 303 that teaches trades. Teaches plumbing, teaches electricity, teaches people how to be auto mechanics, teaches people how to repair computers. This is where we should be starting to concentrate our educational efforts in the coming years. And I'm wondering if we got some more of those schools on the planning board, or if we're just adding them in the high schools themselves. But most of these kids, they're not going to find any work when they get out unless we start teaching them a trade.
Sure. No, so that's a great question, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. We are nationally and state recognized in our career tech opportunities, in large part because of the facility that you highlighted. But I want to explain that facility is very different than career tech high schools that you will find in most other districts. So if you go over to Grand Prairie, they have a dedicated career tech high school. It's DeBisky High School, and you choose to go full-time. That's your high school. You go to DeBisky if you want to do CTC or CTE. In Arlington, that facility serves all of our community, and it was built to consolidate career tech programs that were scattered across the district at all the high schools and a few of them at UTA and TCC, massively expand them because we had waiting lists. And so we serve every high school kid in the district who wants to do career tech. We do some programs that are based at the high school level. A lot of them are based at the CTC, and we provide transportation throughout the school day back and forth to that building. We move about 5,200 high school kids every 2 days through that building through over 50 different CT programs. And so, if you go drive by right now, And that was built in the 14 bond. It opened in 2017. And the 19 bond, we already knew we needed more space there. So if you drive by now, there's a substantial addition going into that building. So we can continue to have no wait list for these programs. But we have everything from the trades that you mentioned. We have machining classes. We have very advanced construction classes, welding. We have a very significant health sciences program based there as well. And so, and we have everything from our ag facility. We also have a very big ag science facility on West Pioneer Parkway. We have so many more programs. And I went to Sam Houston, graduated 25 years ago. Back then it was like you had metal shop, you had wood shop, you had cosmetology, you had a handful of other things. The offerings that we have now, from career tech in the engineering space to horticulture, floriculture, to the phlebotomy and health sciences, and the intentionality of those programs, I just also want to highlight, our kids are able to get all those programs and their certifications for free. And the reason that's important, thank you, the reason that's important is, again, we're serving underprivileged students. If they leave us and they have to go to a program where they got to take out a loan to go get that education and get that certification, just the statistics are, some of them will not complete those programs because of the financial cost, because they have other things going on in their life that'll pull them away, and they're never going to come back and finish. Our kids are getting these certifications with us for free, immediately going out into the workforce, certified in ways at age 18 that they might not otherwise be able to achieve until 2021, 22. And then they're immediately getting to make that big benefit for their families in the form of higher wages. So every year we have kids coming out of the CTC at age 18 and signing $45,000 to $55,000 contracts with different folks involved in all sorts of industries, from GM to Bell Helicopter and other opportunities like that. So that is very important, and we're absolutely aware of it, and we will continue to make that an emphasis here.
Does the board think that one campus is sufficient, or are they planning an additional campus?
We think it's sufficient because we serve all the high schools from it. The kids are transported throughout the day and evening to and from that campus, and all of our programs are either at or near capacity, and we are expanding it. We think that model works much better for us, so students can continue to do things like advanced academics and sports and fine arts at their home high schools, rather than making a smaller number of students choose to opt into a full-time career tech program.
Hey Justin, Mike Columbus here.
Hey, how are you doing, Mike?
Good. Two questions, two issues. When do you anticipate the transition of the 6th grade to the junior high schools? And obviously that's going to create a lot of more under capacity utilization in the elementary schools. So how many schools do you anticipate having to close as a result of that?
Sure.
And then the second question is regarding this new program for teachers that are highly ranked in the state of Texas.
Yes.
They're eligible for a $30,000 bonus. How many teachers in Arlington are eligible or might be eligible for that new program of higher salary?
Sure, I'll take that last question because it's a little bit easier. So the program you're talking about for teachers is called Teacher Incentive Allotment. It is a phased-in program where districts have to apply to get into it from the state. Once you're approved, you can get access if teachers meet certain qualifications for extra money you can put towards compensation. The district has to create a compensation plan, things like that. We're in the middle of doing that application en route to starting a pilot program. But yes, in general, teachers can get more money if they meet certain metrics and qualifications. Districts have a lot of say over what those are. In some way, they do have to incorporate the accountability system, which is a little bit of a controversial thing with teachers, but almost all the districts in the area are doing this, in part because if you are in Dallas ISD and you are a TIA teacher and you want to come to Arlington, we can only continue to provide you that extra compensation in Dallas for a certain number of years unless we also become part of the program. So we are opting into that program. It will be phased in, and while the big selling point is teachers can make up to $30,000 more, in practice, it's an extremely small number of teachers who qualify for that. But there are a substantial number of teachers who can get the $2,500, $5,000, a little bit over $5,000 kick in to their pay. And we can do things like structure incentive, where if we have a need to get some really highly qualified folks onto an underperforming campus, we can structure and use that money that way as well. On the other side, with the 6th grade move, we just got the recommendation from district administration at our last meeting. Next Tuesday, they will present their version or their proposal of how that would, if we were to do it. to make that move. The board has not approved the sixth grade move yet. I can tell you what I think, and I'm in favor of it. To your point of how does that affect the consolidation in the future, it actually has a really big impact, and that's why this decision will drive a lot of that. So regardless, if sixth grade passes, we're going to have campuses that are even more underutilized than they are now at the elementary level. If it doesn't pass, it doesn't change that we still have a significant number now. But what we have to do is make that sixth grade decision next week, one way or the other. The next step is we'll be working with demographers and some consultants on another thing that gets underlooked at, I think, is how much of the underutilization issue is driven by the fact that some of our school boundaries haven't changed in 20 or 30 years. And they're going to also look at what can we do to maximize moving boundaries around to create the efficiencies, because frankly, some of our boundaries don't make a lot of sense now. They were drawn when we had a lot more kids at some of those campuses, and so some neighborhoods were maybe put with a school that maybe wasn't the closest school to them, because that's just where we couldn't overpack, this other campus. And we're not in that position anymore, so part of it will also be looking at the boundaries. Once those studies are done, and according to Dr. Smith, they're hoping to present another proposal in the early winter, so January, February of next year, of what the magnitude of the consolidations might look like and some potential candidates for that. I mean, I'm being upfront with everyone I'm talking to that given the trends we're seeing, given the underfunding from the state, everything that we're signaling is we're heading into an environment where a lot of those east side campuses where I grew up and I have a lot of connection to, a lot of them are built so close together and a lot of them are underutilized now. Given the environment, I think several of them are going to have to be potential candidates.
I was going to say, I think I had one other question Ms. Green asked, probably wouldn't ask, but asked me to ask.
Okay.
She wanted to know about kids' safety. Are we going to armed guards? How are we protecting our kids?
Yep.
How are we preventing some mass shooting or something like that? And I know that's a loaded question, literally, but I'm going to say it like this. I think it's probably the most important topic in regards to what's going on in Arlington.
Sure. So, my 3 kids are in AISD, and safety is a big issue. We have been working on safety. For those of you who are on the 2014 bond committee with me, you'll know this. It'll sound familiar. I see Mr. Folks here. And in 2014, we spent a big chunk of bond money reconfiguring the entrances to all of our elementary campuses and several others. So if you walk into, I spent until 4th grade at Crow Elementary. You used to be able to walk up, open the door at Crow, and you had unfettered access to the whole building. Starting with 14, and this took several years to implement, every elementary school now has what's called a security vestibule. So if you walk up to an elementary today, you can't open the doors. And oh, by the way, all the windows and the doors are coated now with bullet-resistant coating. You have to buzz in. Someone will buzz you in. Even after they buzz you in, because it might seem like they're letting you in quick, when you come in, you're only allowed access to a little room, and they have to be able to see you and then further buzz you in. There's cameras all over the place. So it takes multiple steps to even get into the office. That was one thing we did in 14. We also have massively increased our camera coverage over the last 2 bond programs to where 90% of the common areas at our high schools are entirely covered. And then the other thing I would emphasize, you mentioned armed guards in particular. We have armed guards at every campus. We have 2 Arlington PD as school resource officers at every high school, a minimum of 2. We have a school resource officer from APD at every junior high. And then 2 sessions ago, the legislature mandated that we have an armed law enforcement or other certified person at every campus. So we also have an armed guard at every one of our 53 elementary schools. Side note, legislature mandated it. They're only giving us $33,000 a year per campus for that. And a tiny bit for each kid. So we're having to come out of pocket for that. We're still keeping APD at the junior high and high school levels. We are contracting with private providers for the elementary schools because APD's they don't have 53 extra officers to give us on a full-time basis. And it's just not gonna work out. But that has been in place for 4 years now. We were the first district in DFW, I believe, to fully satisfy that mandate.
That's awesome. Well, I wanted to say congratulations on all the hard work you're doing, and thank you for coming. As part of our thank you, Senior Men's Group always donates a check for $100 to the foundation that you want it to, and I was told that we're going to send it to the Arlington ASID Foundation. Well, congratulations.
The foundation is not part of the school district, but they work closely with us, and they give money every year for teacher grants. So teachers can apply to them for projects they want to do. And last year, the foundation gave away about $200,000 in grants.